Well, this week, the U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments in a case in regards to the Colorado ban on conversion therapy for youth here in Colorado. And the plaintiff in this case, Kaylee Childs, argues the law violates her right to free speech. Childs is a licensed therapist in Colorado. You're a licensed therapist in Colorado. She is a practicing Christian. You're a practicing Christian. Do you agree with her?
You know, as I read Kaylee Childs' reflections and what she put forth to the court, I really saw some major differences in how she sees this case and how she sees the law in Colorado than how I understand it. I've been working here since 2019. I work with many teenagers and many families who come to me seeking help with navigating questions of faith, questions of sexuality, questions about gender, and I've never had to turn a family away who wants to integrate their faith and navigate these questions in a value congruent way. And I've never felt like my speech has been restricted. I also don't think of therapy as a place where it's merely talking. And I think that's a pretty fundamental difference between my approach and Child's. I think of therapy as medical care, providing a service that people are paying for. And if it was merely about talking to one another, that would be more of a mentorship or a coaching role.
So there's not really a space for free speech in that realm then?
You know, I could imagine situations that would be infringements on free speech if a law was to be put forth that said, you know, as a licensed clinician, you have to teach your clients certain, let's say, perspectives on something like gender medical transition. You have to come from this vantage point on the kind of morality, let's say, of gender transition. Or if there were rulings on what you have to believe about marriage or sexual ethics, that might be an infringement on a therapist's freedom of speech. But to say that certain interventions are not effective and have been demonstrated to be harmful is not about my speech. It's about what I can and can't do as a licensed provider based on the evidence that we have today in the field.
So Dr. Sadusky, you support this ban on conversion therapy.
I do.
Even wrote a brief about it.
I did.
What compelled you to do that?
So typically I would not do a brief or anything in the political or legal realm. I leave that for the experts in that space, and I prefer to train therapists and train pastors and work with my clients. But when I read this case and when I read the argument Childs was making, I was not compelled by it. I felt like the framing around free speech as the realm of therapy felt inappropriate. I felt like it was a poor representation of what therapists can and can't do in therapy. And I felt like very few of the briefs on her side were written by people who were trained mental health professionals who were doing this work all the time. So as a Christian who, again, does this work week after week and month after month, year after year, and has done a ton of research with Christians who are navigating these questions, I really did feel compelled to speak up and to share a perspective of somebody who's an expert in this field and works regularly with the families being discussed.
Yeah. How long have you been doing this?
So I've been working in this space since about 2014, and I've been doing research just as long with these families, but I've been licensed here in Colorado since 2019.
In your previous writings, you said this ban actually protects Christian children. How?
So one of the most important things to remember about this ban is that it actually is representing an understanding that we've learned over many years of research with mostly adults who are navigating questions around sexuality and gender. And what we've learned is people of faith are most often the people who are seeking out conversion therapy. These are people who are intrinsically religious. These are people who care deeply about their faith, and they will do anything if they believe that it brings them closer to God. And so when minors, when youth go to therapy and they want to receive care, and they're being told that the only Christian way to do that is to seek a change in orientation or a kind of annihilation of gender distress to get rid of it completely, they're very vulnerable in that position. Parents are very vulnerable when they're taught that the only way to be a godly Christian is to seek conversion therapy. And so when these families go and get care and the care is ineffective, people are not walking out of therapy without attraction to the same sex, People are not walking out of therapy with no gender distress. They become very disillusioned, alienated from God, and the one variable that's most important in their life, their faith, is now robbed of them. And so how does this harm these young people? Well, they can't access the resource that's been so central to their life, their faith in God. They believe that they are inadequate and flawed in some fundamental way because they didn't do it right. They must not have done the treatment right. And many of them reject their faith altogether. And the other key piece I write about in my brief is this, that parents are being taught when they go see conversion therapists that they are to blame, at least in part, for their child's sexuality or gender. So these parents come to see me and they've been beating themselves up, blaming themselves, feeling immense guilt for this theory that they somehow caused these experiences in their kids. As you can imagine, that does not help parents show up for their kids. And if kids are being taught that their parents are the cause of something that's immensely conflicted and painful, and they have to live with one another, that creates immense conflict and alienation in that home. And so I end up meeting with those families often after that and trying to help pick up the pieces, increase communication, repair trust that's been broken, and challenge some of these theories that are not rooted in science and are not helpful for these families to be able to be close, cohesive, and move forward together.
So some of your clients are individuals who have had conversion therapy previously.
That's correct.
And is it just working on the aftermath of that?
You know, one of the biggest challenges after conversion therapy is people don't want to go back to therapy. When the focus has been on your sexuality or on your gender, and many of these young people don't get adequate mental health care for depression, anxiety, suicidality, they're not getting evidence-based treatment, they assume that therapy can't help them. And so when they come to see me, many of the teens are really skeptical, as you can imagine, of me as a clinician and doubt that therapy will work. And you may know this, that the number one predictor of therapy working is the strength and quality of the relationship with the therapist. So trust in therapists is really severed after these approaches. And so gradually building trust is really important, but also really challenging. And many of these parents come and they've been so trained to think about sexuality and gender in ways that are not rooted in reality, that it's a lot of legwork building trust with them as well. And then ultimately, by the time people come to see me after therapy that's been rooted in conversion therapy, their mental health symptoms have often gotten much worse because they've just delayed that therapy so long out of fear of it not being effective or helpful.
Do you believe conversion therapy works?
I have sat with enough families, enough individuals who have sought it to know that conversion therapy as a whole does not create categorical shifts in same-sex attraction. People who come to me after conversion therapy on the whole continue to experience attraction to the same sex over the course of their life. And if there's an ebb and flow in their experience of attraction and their orientation, we in the field would talk about that as natural fluidity. I don't see any evidence from the research we have on conversion therapy and on newer approaches that are oriented in that direction that demonstrates that it's effective. And I think anything that is beneficial that people report through conversion therapy can be received through adequate psychological care, leaving behind conversion therapy.
Besides it being ineffective, do you find it harmful?
I have witnessed harms from conversion therapy as well. You know, some people tell me that it wasn't so much that it was harmful, as in, electric shock therapy or some of those older interventions that were tied to conversion therapy, but it was so focused on something that was not going to change that the harm often that I've seen is what you didn't get in the therapy. So yes, I've heard cases of explicit harm that has come from conversion therapy, immense shame, guilt, increased suicidality, again, distance in the relationship with one's parents, with God, and hesitancy to go back to therapy. I think those are pretty significant harms. And then I've also seen just the harm that happens when you're not getting the care you need and you're distracted by something else.
You mentioned a little bit about the relationship with parents and their faith. How does the aftermath impact a family as a whole of conversion therapy?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of families where the parents really start to rethink their beliefs altogether. They feel so disillusioned by some of these approaches that were told to them as if they were the kind of godly Christian approach, that it becomes really difficult for many parents and many teens to preserve any faith at all. And so that's one of the things I've seen in these families, is just feeling like a foundation is pulled out from under them. Again, I already mentioned this, but high conflict in these homes, lack of communication, and just a general mistrust of one another and a mistrust of oneself. Parents feel so much guilt and shame, and that can come out sideways onto their child, and they become almost the container for a lot of emotions the parents don't know what to do with. And that's been something that's been really important to attend to in therapy as well.
Do you support or affirm LGBTQ patients?
So I think different people define that differently, right? What does it mean to support and affirm LGBT people? What I can tell you is it matters so little to me how I label that. Like if I say to somebody, I affirm you, I support you. Well, that's convenient that I think I do. But what's most important to me and what I tell my clients is, do they feel affirmed and supported when they sit with me? Do they feel respected, listened to, and as if me as a therapist is honoring their autonomy and allowing them to move through the world and make decisions that they're going to make about their life? I'm there to walk alongside them and help them with that. And I could say, yes, I affirm and I support LGBT people. But what is actually more important to me is that people come and meet with me and they feel affirmed and they feel supported by me. And in that way, I think I've heard from clients that they do experience that from me.
So you want them to feel affirmed?
I do want them to feel affirmed. I want them to feel supported and respected by me as a clinician. And that is really important to me in my work.
Do you think there's a space for LGBTQ people in Christianity?
You know, that's a complicated question for me, to be honest. I think sometimes Christians are very optimistic about how our communities actually are with LGBT people. I want our communities to be spaces that LGBT people can thrive in. I also am aware there's a lot of barriers to that in people's misunderstandings and biases and a lack of familiarity with the gifts of LGBT people. And so I work pretty regularly to help make our communities safer and more secure for people who are people of faith, who are people with LGBT experiences. And I've seen many churches do really well in walking with people, and I've seen many churches do really poorly in walking with people. What I hear and what I see in the research is many people with LGBT experiences want to have a spiritual life. They want to attend a faith community. And for many, they feel that these experiences preclude them, not only from a faith community, but from a relationship with God. And so it becomes really important to look hard as people of faith at the ways that we've not helped and done harm to LGBT people and have really driven people away from our communities who we suffer by not having there.
How do you ensure your personal beliefs don't affect your work with your clients?
Yeah, so I actually think as therapists, our personal beliefs and values do come into our work. How could they not, right? I think the idea of neutral therapy that doesn't bring in spirituality or our beliefs at all, and for somebody who's non-religious, that would be the case as well. They probably have to work with their beliefs and values. And the way I do that is called bracketing. So my beliefs and values are with me everywhere I go. But when I'm in a therapeutic space, they're sitting next to me. They're not the thing that's driving everything I do and say. They're right here, and I have to bracket them as I do work with people. Because if I don't, I am infringing and using therapy as a means of control and often manipulation. So they're there, they're with me. I have to know how they might bump up against other people in my work. But it's my job as a clinician to hold those for myself and to not use those as a weapon to try to control people.
How do you address parents that want you to change their kids?
Yes, this comes up a good bit, and Giles speaks to this and assumes that she would have to turn these families away. And I have never had to turn a family away who comes to me and says, I want you to change my child. So how do I respond? The first thing is I ask them a little bit more about that. Can you tell me about what you're hoping for in that, why you're hoping for that, and who taught you, who told you that that was really the only approach that was helpful? And then once we understand that and appreciate that and validate the pieces of that we can validate, I share with people a little bit about my approach. And my approach for sexuality is something called sexual identity therapy, which was developed by a colleague of mine to work with people of faith and has been referenced by APA and SAMHSA as a licit approach here. And so I teach the families, here's what I have to offer. I don't know how to change a person's orientation or gender. There are no established protocols that do that effectively, and I've witnessed the harm of those approaches. And I'm happy to explain that to families and take questions. But then I offer them what I do in therapy that's religiously accommodating, and that also allows these young people to explore these kind of values and explore their experiences without me as the therapist deciding at the start the outcome.
So what is the difference between conversion therapy and what you discuss with your patients?
The biggest difference between what I do in therapy and what a conversion therapist does starts with theory. So the theory behind conversion therapy most often looks at how environmental factors cause a person to be attracted to the same sex or cause a person to experience gender distress. I don't know what causes a person to be attracted to the same sex or the opposite sex. And I don't know what causes a person to experience gender dysphoria. And so those theories have a big impact on the interventions that we do or don't do in therapy. I don't promise parents that at the end of therapy their child will no longer be attracted to the same sex. And I don't insinuate explicitly or implicitly that their gender dysphoria will go away through the therapy that I offer. What I offer instead is walking with people, diagnosing and assessing what's relevant to their experience. So getting a whole psychological picture. Are they experiencing depression, anxiety, suicidality? Treating those things with evidence-based interventions that I would use with any person who comes in my office. And then helping them explore adaptive coping, increasing their support, removing barriers to support in their lives, and being able to help them explore identity without me dictating at the start of therapy where I think that needs to end up. And the final piece that distinguishes my approach from conversion therapy is this. At the end of therapy, if a person who comes in to see me and they're gay at the start of therapy and they're gay at the end of therapy, that is successful therapy for me. And if I meet with somebody who experiences gender dysphoria at the start of therapy and at the end of therapy that's still present, that's not failed therapy for me. And for the conversion therapist, when people persist in experiences of same-sex sexuality or persist in experiences of gender identity that depart from their sex, that would be seen by the conversion therapy as a failure. And I don't think of it in that way.
You talked about the importance of trust between you and your patient. Oftentimes, your young patients likely come because of their parents are wanting them to come to therapy. How do you think your patients feel comfortable talking to you about their sexuality?
So most people who come to therapy, teens or not, don't feel comfortable, especially at the start, talking with their therapist about a lot of things, including sexuality. Sexuality is a super intimate part of our lives, and from a trauma-informed lens, it's really critical to not assume that because I'm a therapist, I'm automatically owed your trust. And so that trust has to be built over time with just about anybody, and I teach my teen clients that because I think that's important for their lives. They ought not trust somebody just because they say they can be trusted. Trust is built, trust is earned, and that's true in therapy as well. So at the start of therapy, I actually try to be pretty respectful and not dig into some of those pieces, and I make that very explicit, that you have no reason to trust me yet, so I'm actually not going to just dive into asking questions about your sexual history, about your sexual experiences, and about your experience of sexuality. I think that's something that I earn a right to over time. And that in and of itself, I think, builds trust with people. They get a sense that you're not going to intrude, you're not going to push past their boundaries. And that's another thing that needs to be taught to teenagers, that if they don't want to talk about something, they have every right to say that, and they ought to expect the person across from them to not push the envelope. So it's really critical in work with teens as well. And then as time goes on, what people tell me is that they begin to see how I respond to them, see how I respect them, see how I allow for them to think differently than their parents, if that's the case. And I honor and validate their experience over time, that they may look back on the start of therapy and say, wow, yeah, that was really hard to talk about this then. And now I feel a lot of relief, a lot of freedom being able to share with you about the questions, the experiences that I have.
If these clients, the youth that you speak to, have different belief systems than their parents, oftentimes these families come to you because you are faith-based. How do you navigate if their relationship with their faith is different from their family?
Well, that is so common in teenagers, right? I often tell parents that, number one, this is kind of a typical part of human development, is differentiation of self. So teens have to be able to push back on sources of authority, on people who think differently from them, and they have to be able to reason through their own perspective. And if we try to control that and shut that process down, we're just delaying it till later. And teens benefit from places where we as adults are not so fragile, that we can receive them exactly where they are, and we can tolerate them being at a different spot than their parents. So I teach parents that actually if they're hoping for me to come in and just be one more source of authority correcting their teen, they are going to be disappointed. I want that teen to find a sustainable path forward, and the best way for them to do that, and I would argue the best way for them to do that while incorporating a personal faith, is for people giving them the space to actually push back on the perspectives and understandings of the people around them. And parents, as scary as that can be, and that's true in general, but also true in the realm of sexuality and faith and spirituality, parents get that if you clamp down on a teenager, all you're doing is giving them something to push up against, and then that's a distraction from the teen actually exploring their identity in a more sustainable way. So creating space, yes, boundaries, high expectations, high warmth is the best approach to parenting, and I think it's really critical in work with teenagers as well.
What's your message to those who say your work does not do enough for the LGBTQ community?
I do hear that from people. I think there's people who would say that I don't go far enough in affirming in ways that they might affirm. And then there's people on the kind of other side, if you will, who would say I go too far and I'm too flexible and I kind of allow too much space for people. I'm not kind of moving people in a direction of a fixed outcome in another direction. And what I can tell you as a person who's worked in this space for over a decade is that there are people with LGBT experiences who have deeply held convictions, and many times they don't feel respected and supported by clinicians who don't appreciate the significance of their spiritual identity. And so they end up being grateful that a therapist can hold the gravity of that and the weight of that and respect that. And that's just important to me. I can't square kind of getting everybody to think what I'm doing goes exactly where they would go. And to that I would say I'm grateful we have clinicians who do different things in therapy and come from different perspectives, because there's people who would want to be working with me, and then there's people who might want to work with a person who's critical of me in a different direction. But I've been really impacted to see how many of us in this space who care about LGBT people can work together on common goals, even if we don't all agree on everything.
Have you ever heard that from your patients, asking you that, or claiming that you don't go far enough for them?
I haven't gotten that feedback from people. I think what I hear from patients is when they're in a place of vulnerability, they really want the therapist to just tell them the answer in any direction. And so sometimes where they get frustrated with me is, won't you just tell me what to do, or won't you just tell me that this is the right path for me? And what I say to people is, what does it matter what I think about what path you're on? I want you to know in your core that the path you're on is right for you. So me just telling you what I think is me just being one more source of authority, one more mentor who's telling you what I think about your life. What I want for you is when you're an adult and you look back on our work, to feel like I did right by you, which means I gave you the space to come to the place of a soft landing and an anchor for you. And that's really key to me in this work. And as much as clients do want us to just kind of tell them what to do or tell them where to go, over time I hear from people that they're grateful I didn't foreclose and shortcut that for them.
What will happen if this ban is overturned?
I have a lot of thoughts about that. I mean, I think on the one hand, our field is pretty clear about the harms of conversion therapy and the ineffectiveness of it. And so I hope that people who are experiencing care that is not up to the standard of care will simply file ethics complaints against providers who are not helping them in work. And that will absolutely be allowed, even if this ban gets reversed. And so I think a big piece of this for me is making sure that the public is informed of what to do if they meet with a licensed therapist who is not doing effective work. They can still make those complaints. My biggest concern, honestly, about this ban being overturned is how it signals to the public that perhaps these approaches are not so bad after all. And I think vulnerable parents, vulnerable Christian families might be inclined to go see a provider who is not well trained in working with people with these experiences and assumes they know exactly what to do and does harm intentionally or unintentionally in the process. So I think some people have stayed away from this work because they've been afraid of the law. And perhaps there's actually value in that if they're not trained to be effective in this work. And so I could imagine more people being willing to work with minors who just lack the formation and training to do that work effectively. And this is in part why I'm wanting to share with people of faith who are working in this space that there are religiously accommodative approaches that allow them to work effectively and not do the harm that's caused by conversion therapy.
What toll will it take on LGBTQ mental health?
I think a lot of people are already suspicious of therapy and suspicious of going to therapy because we as a field have sometimes done real harm in our work with LGBT people. And I think that will be cemented in some ways for people. I think the idea that if you go to a therapist, you can't count on that therapist not doing harm in this area, and the law doesn't state that in a broad sense, really does lead to feelings of hopelessness, demoralization, and just a ton of defensiveness from LGBT people, where it feels like I can't just go to therapy and receive quality care. I now have to be constantly vetting this person and making sure they're doing their job. And that level of hypervigilance is not what we want for people, and certainly not LGBT people in our communities.
The Trevor Project did a survey recently that said 15% of LGBTQ people don't seek mental health treatment in fear of conversion therapy. Do you think a number like that would grow?
I absolutely could see that number growing. I hear from teens already that they're hesitant to go to therapy around these experiences, even with laws like this in place. I think for many of them, they're much more comfortable looking online, talking with their peers and people they already know about these experiences. I think also these young people will be hesitant to talk with their parents, especially if their parents are people of faith, because they may incorrectly, in some cases, assume that their parents are hoping for conversion or change. There's so much power that happens when a theologically conservative Christian says the only Christian way to do therapy is something that tries to change orientation or identity. That sends a message to people about spirituality, it sends a message about therapy, and I think we will see more people avoid therapy or delay it, which only makes their mental health worse over time.
Are there any misconceptions you feel the public has about therapists who identify as Christian conservatives?
Absolutely. I think a lot of people assume that the only way to be effective in therapy is to leave behind Christian beliefs and values altogether. So I'm told by people that there's a suspicion about a person being a person of faith because people of faith have done harm to LGBT people. And so that's one misunderstanding, that certain backgrounds, certain understandings of the human person and sexuality mean you're somehow unable to be effective with people navigating these experiences. I think another assumption is that we're a homogenous group, that we all think about all of these things in exactly the same way. And that also, I think, creates a lot of misunderstanding in our work. And then finally, I think that people assume that people of faith are trying to simply control the ideas of other people and can't have self-control and self-discipline in work with clients. And I think it's really, really critical as a licensed mental health provider to be able to sit across from people of all backgrounds, of all religiosity, of all culture and ethnic backgrounds, and be able to be effective and be culturally humble in that work. And I do think there's an assumption that people of faith can't do that or simply don't do that well. And I've been struck by the amount of Christian clinicians licensed in Colorado who are doing effective work with LGBT people. And I've also been struck by the Christians in Colorado who are licensed who have not done right by LGBT people. And I think we need to learn how to be well trained and be competent in this work and not assume that religiosity makes us competent, and also not assume that it makes us incompetent.
What's your message to LGBTQ youth as they navigate their journey during this climate?
I often remind my clients that this is a really, really challenging time. It feels like the heat is turned up. And so if they're experiencing the impact of that, they're in such good company with so many who are really weathered by where we are. And so I think the first thing is just naming you are absolutely not the only one weighed down and burdened by the intensity of this climate. I think there's a lot to be said with LGBT youth as finding the pockets of safety and pockets of security in your life to be able to anchor you in this time, to root you down in all of the intensity around you so that you're not simply being blown over by the magnitude of the noise, but you're finding places and spaces where you can experience effectiveness, autonomy, freedom, and safety in a world that can feel really, really challenging for so many right now.
What's your message to Christians as they watch this, as they see this case roll out and watch the current climate we're in? What do you want them to know?
I think I want people of faith to remember that we are not merely victims being attacked in this socio-political climate. I think a lot of the rhetoric right now, a lot of the messaging in faith-based circles is that we are constantly being attacked and targeted and need to be on the defensive. And that creates really black and white thinking in us that leads us to leave behind nuance that is really critical. I think fear has been a driving factor in many Christians and their approach to people with LGBT experiences. I want to encourage Christians to get to know people in our communities and outside of them who are people who identify as LGBT, learn and seek to understand, talk less, listen more, and to recognize that people navigating these experiences are not the enemy. They're not a representative of this or that political agenda that you feel threatened by. And that this law in Colorado is really not about viewpoint discrimination. It's about protecting people from things that simply don't help and protecting people's faith when they want to come to therapy and explore that without it being robbed of them through harmful approaches that just don't work.
Do you think it's your job to change LGBTQ people?
No.
You want to elaborate?
No, I don't think it's my job to change LGBT people. What I can tell you is that if I sat across from anybody and I thought that they were making it their job to change me, I would never want to talk to them again. If we are so fragile that we need the person across from us to be different for us or for our beliefs to be okay and sturdy, then I think we've really missed the mark. And I think it's really critical for me as a person of faith, but as a human being, to give people the respect that I would want, which is the respect that allows me to be exactly where I am and to not be seen as a project to be solved or a project to be changed.
You've been very open with your belief and your support of the conversion therapy ban here in Colorado. Do you have any regrets coming out and sharing your support for this law?
I don't have regrets about sharing my support for this law. I think it's been really encouraging to see that people are wanting nuanced perspectives that bring together areas that feel disparate or disconnected from one another. And so in that sense, I'm grateful. I think I sometimes worry that parents who would seek out conversion therapy would assume that I can't walk with them. And so they might not come see me after me being so clear that these laws are helpful and not harmful. And so I think to those families, I would want for them to know that this is not about political arguments. This is not about trying to convince people to change their beliefs, to change their theology. This is about making sure that we're walking with young people through interventions that actually work and offering evidence-based care. And so when I meet with Christians who want conversion therapy and I say all that, I've never had a family walk out and never come back. They want their child to receive mental health care. They want their child's faith, if they have one, to be honored and respected. And they don't want their therapist to come in and just control the outcome. And so these families, I think, are told they want one thing, and what they really want is a whole and holistic life for their child. And Christian and non-Christian therapists who are well-trained can offer that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I listen to your perspective, and I think oftentimes we draw assumptions through faith-based communities, and we hear the term culture war.
Yes.
A lot. Should this be part of a culture war?
It certainly is part of the culture war, but it ought not be part of the culture war. People with these experiences are just casualties, then, of a larger culture war where people get lost. I often remind parents that your child is not the activist that you see on TV that you may agree with or disagree with. Your child is 14 or 16, and they've come to you and they've trusted you with a part of their experience of the world. It's a compliment. And if you treat them like a culture warrior on either side of the spectrum, you will miss your child. Because none of us, if we're honest, are like everybody else. Everybody has their own experience, their whole perspective, and they need parents and therapists who see through all the noise and respond to the person and what they need. And what teens don't need is somebody to promise a change of orientation or gender identity at the start of therapy. What they need are licensed providers who bring in evidence-based interventions, and they can get that under Colorado's law.